There are two kinds of ways of looking at morality. One of these is the axiomatic way, which is to say that we have something like a Bible or a Torah or a, what's the Islamic one, the Quran. We have a text, there's a set of rules, we need to follow that with a fundamentalist interpretation, literalistic interpretation, and we need to just stay true to the book. Good example of this is Pastor Steven Anderson. He just says, the Bible is my authority. And I think he's probably the most interesting creationist on YouTube. The rest of them seem very blasé, but he's very theatrical. So he's kind of fun to watch. And he'll say, really, nothing in our perception of reality matters. Science is wrong. What matters is the axiomatic Bible. On the other hand, you have Memetic morality. And Memetic morality says that our mores, our behavior, should change depending on the context, depending on what new knowledge we have, new technology. So you look at traditional or ancient Europe, you had the Spartans and Athenians. Spartans and Athenians, ethnically, genetically, very similar people, similar background, similar myths and legends. They both believed in a Greek pantheon. They both had legends about Zeus, for instance. And despite their common origins, they split off in terms of the Spartan worldview, what it means to be a good Spartan, what it means to be an honorable Spartan versus what it meant to be an Athenian. The focus on martial virtues versus wisdom, intelligence, two very different societies. And I think that a memetic worldview of morality allows for the development of a very evolutionary, very adaptive moral system. And this might be part of the reason why Western peoples have been able to dominate the globe. I mean, if you look at a map of countries, type into Google, map of countries never colonized by the United States, or I said the United States. Well, that's a whole other thing, neocolonialism and the United States, the world capitalist finance system. But, okay, so really we're talking about countries colonized by Europe. Almost every country except technically, I guess, Japan and parts of, is it Malaysia? Or is it Burma? Or what did Burma become? Burma got a new name. What's Burma's new name? Anyway, so there's very few countries that were never colonized in some way or another by some European country. Burma is now called Myanmar. So I guess Myanmar was never technically colonized. So very few countries. And you talk about the Indo-European languages, very dominant. You talk about Latin writing. Latin, Cyrillic, Greek script, these writing systems basically dominate the world. There's only, I guess, Israel has the Hebrew script, and China, Japan, and Korea have their own Asiatic scripts. And I guess you have Arabic script as well. But the Latin alphabet dominates the world. Indo-European language family dominates the world. European colonialism dominates the world. Global finance, capitalism. Now, you could say, oh, that's moving to Beijing, or it's moving to India, or it's moving to Brazil or something. But, traditionally the world finance centers are London, they are New York, they are Berlin, or even Moscow. So, this difference between axiomatic thinking and memetic thinking when it comes to morality is very interesting. Because you could have a situation, for instance, where a very smart man comes along, and he says, this is how you should act. And he tells a bunch of people who, these people would be incapable of coming up with a good moral system because they're just not very good people, they're not intelligent, whatever. But I could, for instance, we talk about dogs and training dogs. So someone can go up to a dog and form a bond relationship with the dog, use methods of dog training. There are books all about this you can read, but you can teach a dog how to act well. You can teach a dog, do not bark, do not bite, do not pee on the rug, do not, hurt people, be a good dog, and do these various commands and shake people's hands and be happy. So you can train a dog to be good. You can also abuse a dog and make a dog into a terrible wild beast that will bite people savagely and hurt little children. So dogs in themselves don't come built in with a moral code. Dogs are taught behavior, which I call morality. They have learned behavior, they have a moral code that is given to them by human beings. So genetically, dogs... Now, some dog behavior is genetic, and they're genetic predispositions. But even still, even with the level of dog breeding that we've made some dogs into hunting dogs, some dogs into lap dogs, some dogs into, beer keg carrying dogs, they're all different breeds. But still, with a lot of dogs, their difference in behavior has a lot to do with how they're taught. And so you could say and look at certain human populations and say, like, okay, well, this human population is either going to be extremely Christian, extremely God-fearing, extremely moral population, or it's going to be into the gangster rap, it's going to be into gangbangs, it's going to be into orgies, it's going to be into all these behaviors. So the behavior can change drastically depending on the axiomatic morality that's given. So my argument is basically that if you have a very advanced population and then you have a very unadvanced population or primitive population, the advanced population can give down axiomatic rules and say, like, this is how to live life and you can never break these rules, and then really strictly enforce them, and you can turn that population into a much more well-behaved population than if you just said, okay, well, make up your own morality, do a memetic thing. Whereas if you have an advanced population, you give them a set of axioms, they're going to kind of chafe, because they're going to say, hey, things could be done in a better way, we could improve, and we have these axioms. So I want to now take this very abstract discussion and focus it and hone it in on Protestantism versus Catholicism, and looking at two strains in, I guess, both the Catholic and the Protestant side. So you could say on the Catholic side, they said, our axiom is the church. Our stone is the church, the rock is the church, we follow the church. And so that's the axiom that can never be broken. And so whatever the church says is true, and these Protestants are heretics and we have to kill them. On the other hand, you have the kind of Julius Evola view of the Catholic Church, which is like, the Catholic Church is this evolutionary thing that organically integrates pagan traditions over time, and it does not rely upon the axiomatic principles of the Bible. And in fact, some things that the Catholic Church does is kind of in contradiction with the Bible, but that's okay, because it's a memetic, organic system and not an axiomatic system. Now, on the Protestant side, you had two types of people who were pushing Protestantism. On the one hand, you had basically the priest class, like Martin Luther. And they were saying the Catholic Church is not axiomatically following the traditions of the Bible. So we need to Judaize Christianity. We need to get back to the Hebrew roots. We need to get back to the axiomatic nature of religion. And we need to follow things by the book. And we need to stop, doing all this Catholic stuff that's really pagan in origin. We need to stop celebrating Christmas and Halloween and whatever, because really, we need to get back to the Hebrew roots. Now, that's an extreme kind of thing that came later with Protestantism, but there were still elements of that in people like John Calvin. So, on the other hand, those are the priests. On the other hand, you had German priests who had a very long tradition of chafing under Catholic rule. This goes back to, I believe, Henry VIII, should be Heinrich VIII, or was it Henry IV? Anyway, investiture conflict. I think it was Pope Gregory VIII and Henry IV, or something like that. Anyway, investiture contest back in like the 11th century. The emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, this was of the German nation, he was saying, I want to appoint my own bishops. And the bishops then control these bishoprics, and they control this property, and then it's a hereditary property within the church, not hereditary genetically, but hereditary within this priestly organization, that they pass it on, and it cannot be bought or sold. I'm going to appoint the bishops. I'm the head of the church in Germany, basically. And the Pope had a big problem with this. He said, no, I'm the head of the church universally. I'm going to appoint the bishops. They have to be confirmed by me. I have to agree with you. And so there is this conflict. That was in the 11th century. Protestant Reformation didn't happen for many centuries later, but there was a strong tradition in Germany, and the Nazis referenced this. The whole investiture conflict, they had their own view on it. The independence of Germany from Catholicism, this is something that you look at the myth of the 20th century. Alfred Rosenberg, he was very interested in the independence of the Germanic sphere from the Roman sphere. And so there were a lot of German princes who actually said, we reject the Catholic Church as an axiom. Those Mediterranean peoples, they shouldn't be controlling us. Now, they didn't think of it in these, like, racialized terms, that then, like, the Nazis would go back and view it in these racialized terms. But they were simply saying, we don't want to be controlled by Rome. We want to have our own Germanic religion for our people. We want something that suits us, something that's localized to our traditions, something in our German language. We don't want to speak Latin. We want to speak German in the church. So the Protestant Germans, the princes who supported the Protestant Reformation, actually were of an opposite thinking. So they're axiomatic and organic thinkers on both sides. Now, it's interesting in today's context, when we think of moral progression or moral change or moral memetics, we often think of the left. We think of people progressing in the direction of feminism, transhumanism, transgenderism, accepting of gays, on so and so forth, everything revolving around liberty and capitalism and neoliberalism. And you see this progression of morality and you say, okay, the left is really memetic in its morality, and the right wing is more axiomatic. The right wing just says, it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and I believe in the Bible, and my country right or wrong, and I'm always going to support America. And that's another thing, the axiomatic support of America. So if we say, I'm an American patriot, what does that mean? Does it mean I'm a white nationalist, or does it mean I believe in multiculturalism? And you can get very different answers from very different people. This is the consequence of axiomatic thinking. People can't agree on what the actual axiom is. So if someone says, I axiomatically believe in the Bible, well, does that mean that you're an anti-racist, or does that mean you're a, kinist, or whatever they call it? If you're an American nationalist, does that mean you hate Putin and you want to help the brown people of America because you're an American nationalist? Or does it mean you love Putin because he supports traditional American values and you want to return America to its traditional 90% white demographics? So again, when we reference these axioms, things become very problematic. As I said before, if you have a primitive population and you have this advanced population, the advanced population in theory can lay down axioms like 10 Commandments and say, do this thing, and then the people will be better off than if they had no instruction. Now, psychologically, you can view this in your own individual life, that perhaps you have your own concept of morality, but when you were a child, your parents would say things like, you cannot cross the street without looking both ways, you have to hold my hand, you have to do what I say. And you say, why? I don't agree, I don't like that. You say, well, we're going to do it this way. Now, children don't have the right to vote, and I hope they never get the right to vote. I mean, technically, I think 18-year-old females having the right to vote is basically giving children the right to vote. But, that aside, children shouldn't have the right to vote, because children are not advanced enough to make their own morality and make a morality that's actually good for them. They're just going to choose to vote for whoever gives them the most free candy or whatever. That's not good for them. So we need to give axioms to children. We need to give axioms to childlike people. But axiomatic thinking, axiomatic morality in itself usually doesn't win out in the end. It leads to a whole bunch of problems where people are referencing the same word as an axiom, whether it be the Bible, which is a whole bunch of words, a whole bunch of books, or America, which is itself, it's a historical tradition. They reference the same thing and come up with completely opposite conclusions. That's the problem with axiomatic thinking. And so to be a memetic thinker, ultimately, memetics are where axioms are derived. There's a cycle of history where an advanced population will have a memetic process. They'll come up with a good set of axioms, and they'll say, hey, this is a decent set of axioms. They'll hand that off to a bunch of populations that the axioms will kind of spread in a diaspora. And you saw this with Hammurabi's code, which then spread to the Hebrews, and the Egyptians had their own versions, actually, of law that you then see reflected in later Hebrew texts. And that sort of spreads, and it spreads into Europe, and it spreads all over the world. So you see how axioms which are good spread in a memetic way. But eventually, if the environment changes radically enough, whether through agriculture, whether through the Industrial Revolution, or whether through the internet or technology or urbanization, the city, anonymity, all these things change, and so then our morality has to change with it. To simply stick to our guns, stick to our axioms, is not going to be a powerful way to interact with reality. It's like trying to fit a square into a round peg into a square hole. So basically, it depends on who you're talking to, whether axiomatic morality is better or memetic morality is better. You can't just do only one or the other, or say just you can only have, because then what people say is you have objective morality and moral relativism. And I think that is a confusing way to look at it, because it's like sort of looking at an is-ought philosophical question of like, can we derive ought from is? And I'm not even getting into that. I'm just saying sometimes it's good to give people axioms, and sometimes it's good to question things, and sometimes it's good to reevaluate and say like, hey, we've been doing this, we've been acting this way for a while, is it possible that we should change now? I think that's going to be a short video for this topic. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.